Don't transplant your tomatoes until you watch this video. Today I'm going to share with you a common mistake new gardeners make, often without knowing it, that can end their tomato season before it even starts. The average gardener's last frost date is around mid-April, and many may be tempted currently to plant their tomatoes out a week or two before the last frost date because they have too many plants that they started too early, or because they want to get an earlier harvest and eat their first ripe tomato after a whole long winter. I've been there myself, and one year we planted out our tomatoes because we had a lot of tomatoes that were growing kind of big, that we rushed them out and got them planted into our garden. But by the time a week or so later, all of our tomato plants that we planted out got hit by a frost. And of the ones that did manage to grow back, they ended up growing slower and had to grow back from the stress, which ended up delaying them more than if we just planted them out a week or two after our last frost date. You could figure out what your last frost date is by typing in your location where you live plus last frost date, and it'll give you when your last frost date is. Once you have that date, you'll want to wait 1 to 2 weeks after your last frost date, or you'll want to wait until temperatures during the nighttime is 10 degrees Celsius or above. Now, if you still have that tomato itch and want to get your tomatoes planted outside for an earlier harvest, then you'll want to do this instead. All you'll need is a bucket. A 5-gallon bucket or a bigger pot is what you may need if your tomato is very big. But since my tomato is not very huge, I'm just going to be planting it in this bucket, which should look about half the size of a 5-gallon bucket. The tomato I have here is a Stupeka tomato, which produces in about 50 days from seed to harvest, which is why I want to plant it this year, so I could get an early harvest from it. I also have these other early tomato varieties started, all of which takes about 50 days, and the subarctic plenty can mature in as little as 40 days, which I also have started, and is a determinate tomato, which makes it perfect for growing in pots. I'm going to be making a hole for my tomato to plant it in. Then what I got is some bone meal, which will help with the fruiting and flowering so that my tomato produce more for me. And some blood meal that I'm going to add for faster growth while it's getting established. For each of them, I'm going to be adding about 3 of these teaspoons into my container, or about 1 tablespoon. Then next is I'm going to be mixing it into the soil. And then with my tomato plant, I'm going to be taking it out of its pot. And then I'm going to make sure to bury it a bit deeper so roots will start to grow on the step. And then we're going to press it down a little. And then last is giving the tomato a little water. And since it's not like it's going to be a frost every night, you could just leave your tomatoes outside, and only when there is a chance of frost, you bring them in. Then when nighttime temperatures are above 10 degrees or 50 Fahrenheit, you could simply transplant your tomato out of this pot into your garden, or you could continue to let it grow in the container and produce for you that way. And a second alternative is if you have a lot of tomato plants, you could just plant some of them out as test guinea pigs, the ones that you wouldn't really care if the varieties make it or not as much as your main crop. We find that if there's a chance of frost, that we could use some buckets to place over our plants, as well as some blankets, and they help to protect the plant from fully cooking your test guinea pig plants. I'll make sure to place links for the bone meal and the blood meal in the description of this video for your convenience. So we just seen how one early planting mistake can ruin your tomato harvest season. But once you get timing right, there's a few pruning secrets that most gardeners miss that could have boosted their yields. So watch this video over here to see how we prune and tie our tomatoes for maximum yields. Goodbye!